Okay, so for many people today, dating and developing intimate relationships has become kind of an unpredictable field of landmines, right? Online is like a toxic cocktail of expectations, demands on both men and women. We're all trying to check boxes. We're all trying to find someone that checks our boxes. But narcissism, codependency, unacknowledged childhood wounds, trauma, all of these things stand in our way of deeply connecting on a healthy level. I think men are being told that their value comes from what they do rather than who they're being. And women are being told that their value comes from who they already are rather than them needing to what they're expanding into. So, what's not talked about as much is the relationship. We talk about our relationship with others as the main priority, but really the relationship with ourselves first, because that's where our relating, originates from. Uh, our relationships are a mirror, um, and they're a mirror of seen and unseen qualities that we've kind of carried with us through life. Some are useful, many are not useful for integrating into a healthy relationship. Would you say that's accurate?
I wrote it, so yes, by all means.
Um, for many people, as an adult, we build our identity around defense mechanisms that we develop as children, and we've not really taken the proper time out to inspect this. Our mother and father wounds being one of the earliest defense mechanisms. This keeps us from really having that healthy, objective vantage point where we can witness ourselves as benevolently as the others in our lives. So we look for someone to complete us rather than to complement us. And we cope by living this really constrictive kind of outside in life built around status, reputation, rather than expansively living inside out lives through choosing character and values. Beautifully written by Tony, by the way. Uh, why don't more people intentionally choose this?
Well, I think Jordan Peterson said it best. He said, "What you want most will be found where you least want to look." And so I want to preface a lot of this. And by the way, again, thank you for having me here for this. But on the same hand, a lot of this stems from my own journey. So I kind of want to preface this. Um, this is stuff that has been true for me. If you're watching this right now, if you're a woman or if you're a man, doesn't really matter. Age, no matter what that is. Although that's why I was asking you your age, Jesse. But kind of exactly right. I'm 19. Totally looking at my own past experiences and looking at I'm someone that probably should be dead broke, or a menace to society based on a lot of the experiences that I went through, both as a young child, where I did have childhood trauma and abuse, and of course a lot of that went let me just say uninvestigated for the most part, or at least from a really healthy vantage point, it didn't go investigated. And so a lot of these wounds, like we talked about the mother father wound, of which I kind of have both here. So it was like kind of got like a double snafu in a sense, where I'm 50 now. I just turned 50 last month, and had to really take like 45 plus years of just falling down a rabbit hole and looking at a lot of the relationships that I had been in. Many of my relationships had been the female relationships I've been in have been on those ladies have been high on the narcissistic spectrum, and I call it a spectrum because I don't believe in calling people narcissists now. When I was first leaning into that, I've been through hundreds and hundreds of hours of around narcissism and codependency. The one thing I realized looking at that, looking back at all my relationships, was that they had one thing in common, and that was me. And so there's this point in time in your life where you realize things are just have been so screwed up that you start to realize, like, all of my relationships had one thing in common: me. And so what is it about me that I'm bringing to this table that I continue to recreate trauma, chaos, and craziness in my life? And I started to realize that for most of my life, and this is a concept of uh, where I was living an outside in life rather than an inside out life. And I think this begins to be how the vast majority of people struggle with and create so much chaos in both their personal lives. Now, I also want to preface this. I'm more am a in the business world. So I do online marketing and I have since 2006. I hired a mentor about 7 years ago. My first year, I invested about 30 grand with him. It's probably one of the best investments of my life, only because not only did my very next month did I have my first $50,000 month, but I changed. I started over the next couple of years. I changed as a man. I'm really big on models, and I looked at again, how did I show up in these ways? Where did I learn all of this from? And I looked at all of my models, and narcissism was actually with one of my parents. So of course, I learned to pick up traits and qualities of narcissism. I can definitely see where on the scale of the spectrum that I have held and displayed and demonstrated narcissistic qualities. I've more leaned heavily on the codependent side, vast majority of my life. But it required me really sitting down and starting to, and as Jordan, again, just to quote, I quote a ton of people, by the way, but Jordan Peterson said it best also. He said, what may have happened to you in your life, in your past, may not have been your fault. But eventually you got to start treating yourself like someone you care about and you're responsible for. And so I think it's easier and more familiar to stay in an unconscious and I would say like more of like a lower standpoint in life. It's more familiar to, like, for me, I would say, for the longest time, even in my 30s, I would say, I would go so far as to say, even in my late 30s, where playing victim actually got me, I gained more benefit from that unconsciously, right? I gained more benefit by being a victim than I did from being a victor in my life. And why was that? It's because it felt more familiar. So I would play an outside in game. And I can kind of go back to like my very first girlfriend when I was 18 and she was 22. And I had two jobs and I was busting my butt. She started doing, let's just say, a line of work that paid her considerably more, and left me kind of in the dust, so to speak. And so she ended up cheating and I caught her and I was devastated. I was just absolutely like heartbroken. And she told me that she's like, yeah, I cheated because you don't make enough money. And so immediately I went to, oh, I'm not doing enough for her. So in order for me to do enough for a woman, I need to make a lot more money. So what does that do? Right now I start living this outside in life. Oh, I got to start wearing the bling. I got to start making the bling. I got to start driving the car. I got to start, right. And all of a sudden my worth comes from my exterior status. Women do this, men do this alike. So by the way, when I'm in this conversation, because we know like the dating world, like there's more of like, you know, men advocating for men, which I think is important, but sometimes they're pretty heavy handed on the women about it and vice versa, right? I'm very clear about we're all on the same side of the table, right? As a man and a woman, I think this is like really being able to see where we're both on the same side of the table. It's no different than what I do in my marketing. When I create marketing for my real high end clients, all of the marketing, it all has to do with being on the same side of the table, not across the table from one another. And I think the sooner that men and women can begin to start to see that we could benefit from being much more on the same side of the table and also living an inside out life. So I want to kind of come back to that. Living an inside out life allows me to identify my value coming from within, not out here. I make good money now. I live a good quality life now. I take care of my physical fitness now. I take care of my spirituality now. But there's a lot of the exterior stuff that people would be like, ooh, I want that. However, I know that that stuff is nothing more than a consequence of living a solid life that's built on stances, right?
Mhm.
So for me, that's like the big deal. It's like the minute I began to live inside out rather than the outside in, everything changed for me. And I learned this from a mentor, which, by the way, has been married for going on 30 years now. And I have a second mentor who's 80 and his wife is 70. They've been married for 50 years. So so what I've done is I've started to replace the models that I grew up with and that I lived into by the way, which is another really good. By the way, throughout this, you'll notice I speak a lot about stances, and I use a lot of metaphors and analogies because they kind of help the brain put things together for me. Maybe it works for other people too. Um, but yeah, the inside out thing versus outside in, and there's a lot of ways in which that plays out in our lives. It has a lot to do with, sure, what you read, what you consume, what you're watching, what you're hearing, who you're around. All of that can have a play in it. Living an inside out life. But for me as a man, I can say, and I think it is different for women, so I can't really say, but I have worked with women in this perspective. Matter of fact, I would say over since 2008, when I started online marketing, I would say for the vast majority of that time, about 80 to 90% of my clients have been women, in the coaching arena and expert arena. And today now I lean, for whatever reason, I lean more working with men, but I do work with some women as well. But I have noticed a lot of these ideas and these concepts playing out within their lives, because when I work with my high end clients, I'm also find myself digging into their personal stuff too, right? And so I can tell how a business is being run is how someone's internal stances are aligned or misaligned, right? So it's really interesting that I see a lot of these concepts and ideas that I'll share here today actually play out both in business, in relationships, in our finances, in our fitness and health, and things like that. So I think the inside out life is something that, if the men that I work with, I really focus on them living into that philosophy. And when you live into something, it means that you might get it intellectually, but until you begin to embody it and start to experience the challenges of that and begin to move through those challenges, it's kind of like in a relationship in the beginning, especially when you're first trying to kind of figure out, like, you're like, ooh, this person's beautiful, and wow, that would be really great, right? But then you start to realize, okay, well, who are they though? What are they bringing to the table? And I think as you start to gain a higher vantage point as a man, you start to look at, how will this woman complement my life, rather than looking at how will she um, complete my life, right? So, and I think it can be very much the same thing for women. It's like, how does this man complement my life rather than create chaos in my life, right? And I think one of the things I know I went through for many years was getting fascinated by how beautiful a woman would be, and putting up with all the bullshit that came with someone who was not at as high a vantage point. And so one of the other things is that when I did this, I would notice those relationships would go up and down. They would go off and on, and back and forth, and end and restart. It's why, it's because we're triggering a lot of our toxic, past experiences. And it was interesting because I'm not necessarily attracted to blondes. Matter of fact, if you'd ask me, I'd say I'd like a woman with, dark hair, black hair, auburn hair, like something along that lines. However, all of I would say probably the vast majority of my past relationships and my marriage, I was married for about 7.5 years, they were all blonde hair and blue eyes, or blonde hair and green eyes. Guess who has blonde hair and green eyes?
Um,
My mama. That's right. Right. So it wasn't, until I started to figure out my responsibilities and my role in my relationships, that I started to realize, like, man, I'm picking women that, quote unquote, are broken. It, and again, not that they were, that was my perception. Oh, I can
right.
fix them.
Or even if the parts of them were healthy, you maybe zeroed in on the part that was broken.
That's
Wanted
right.
to fix that
Yeah,
part.
because I wanted to make myself useful. Again, being codependent, that was my priority, and I didn't realize that. I want to go in and fix them and be the white knight, which is obviously very horrible to do. It's not useful, I'd rather say. And so I would go in and I would try to fix them, and of course they don't want to be fixed. Nobody wants to really be fixed, quote unquote. And so at that point, I began to realize this was my consistent way of showing up, because it was also, and of course they'd all be hot. Like, even today, I don't have a problem being in a relationship or getting into one. I don't have a problem dating, or if I wanted to have, uh, surfacey sex, like, all of that's easy to do. But it's the quality of the relationship. It's also the quality of my vantage point as a man that makes a huge difference. It's how much responsibility have I taken to be able to stand on these understandings, these awarenesses, and also these areas of my life that I'm now taking responsibility for. And I don't want to tell anybody like I've got it all figured out. I think I've figured out some things that are super important to me as a man. And again, being 50, I found that a lot of these stances work if you're 15 or 50. And matter of
Mhm.
fact, I think a lot of our young culture, especially men, would be super important if they had these indoctrinations. The challenge is there's so much outside in interference, meaning social media, right? The TikToks of the world showing you like, oh, here's what an alpha male is, right? You need to go around kicking doors down, beating the shit out of people, and or just be this thing, right? And it's like there's so much of that noise going on that the signal from here to here doesn't have an opportunity to connect, especially for young men and even men in their 30s, 40s, especially. It's like once you begin to realize how on and off you are with yourself, you start to see why your relationships are on and off, right? Why you might have this toxic back and forth with someone and you can't seem to let it go. Um, it's chances are it's just a mirror of what's going on within ourselves. That's what my experience has been. I've worked with a ton of people over the years that I've been able to witness this same thing happening, and it's really really fascinating because most folks have not taken the time to I call it slowing up to hurry up, right? They've not slowed down to start to say, instead of saying, oh, it's men, or men going, oh, it's women, they're all a bunch of selfish, shallow, this, they all hypergamy, they just want the monies and all this, right? And then of course the men, it's the opposite. It's like, oh, they just want the booty, and they want us to just look good on their shoulder, or on their arms and stuff like this. And there's a lot of this outside in interference going on because it's what society, it's what, especially in our Western culture, it's what they're telling us what's important. And men are being told that it's important that you just shut up, show up, be a man, right? Um, be an alpha, and you better be 6 foot, have six pack abs, and make a six-figure income. If you ain't got that, you ain't getting none of this, right? It's the exact opposite with women too, right? So again, I'm not playing one side here. It's women go through the same challenges as what men have gone through. Now, the difference is today, as opposed to maybe even just 10 years ago, it's changed drastically how online dating is working. You've got, the top 1% of the men, which are 6 foot, six pack abs, and six figure incomes, they have 90% of the online women are coming after them and they get the choice. And if they're not a person, or if they're not a man of character, I'm going to use that word a lot, by the way, this because this is important on both sides. If
Yeah.
they're not a man of character and they're not seeking out someone who could be the mother of their children, for an example, and instead they're looking at like, oh, she's hot, she looks good on my shoulder, or on my arm, or this, that, whatever it is that drives that. And then if it's not what they want, because again, there's a lot of expectations unmet, and unmet expectations out there in the world, he can just throw her away and go get another one because he's got so many that are waiting for him. Meanwhile, you've got, the other, like in China, for an example, like 30% of the men have that in their 30s are still living with their parents and haven't had sex yet. And that's
Wow.
beginning to happen here in the States. You've got, quote unquote boys, young men that are
Yeah.
now, you know, in their 20s that haven't had sex yet. And again, I'm not saying it's the women's fault. I'm saying it's society's concern. I'm not even blaming and pointing the blame anywhere. It's society's concern that we're not raising young men to live inside out lives, for their worth and their value to come from their connection to source, to spirit, to God, and to have an aim in life that means something to them. Now, I can tell you as a 50-year-old man, like today, yes, I have an aim in life and that supports me and that guides me. Um, but I can tell you that was some shit to get through,
Mm.
to get to that point, because I told myself for years, for longest time, that my value came from being able to provide for a woman. Asked me how I found that out. Well, I was going to get married and she was like, baby, we need to do this, this, and this, and this. I had something come out of me that I had never experienced in my life. Like I felt this important, like I was needed, like I was important. Because I can tell you my core wound growing up was I'm not important, right? And so I showed up, dun, 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 dun. It was the first time, and I got addicted to that. I got addicted to being like, oh, I'm that important to someone. And so making money again, right? Like outside in life, I made that the priority. But the difference was, is oh, now someone needs me, right? And so that's where my value came from. And the minute that that relationship started to deteriorate, right, then my self worth, my self efficacy, my self image all started to take a dump, right? Because I was living my life, my vantage point came from living outside in. And the minute that you pull out that outside support system, then I would just slide right back down. And I see this happening to men and I see it happening to women.
Yeah.
So let me pause there first because I've dove into a lot there. So
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm definitely with you on as far as being on the same side of the table. A lot of the media and content that's out there right now is really easy to get into because so it speaks right to a lot of what a lot of us have been through, negatively speaking.
mhm,
Um, so you have these what do they call them? These what are they called? Like trauma tribes, or basically these places where people go to kind of like commiserate, and everyone agrees that women are greedy and selfish and terrible, and then everyone collectively agrees that
yeah,
masculinity is toxic and it must be stopped, and so it's like you've got these like really extreme, and then there's so much of it out there that I'm definitely with you, as far as wanting to be a part of building a bridge, between men and women, where we can be
mhm,
that same language, uh, and understanding each other.
mhm,
Trying to.
yeah.
Uh, let's see. There's
The
a
divisiveness is not going to get us anywhere close to having a country. Let's just call it what it is, right? Let me back up real quickly because that's going to sound really big if I don't give it some context. So in life, what my experience has been is that as a man, and this can be very similar for a woman, in my opinion, um, there comes my relationship with my creator. Then there's the impact that I want to make with my significant other. Then there's the significant other that I want to have with my children, if I had any, which I don't. Then there's the impact that I want to make with my immediate family. Then there's the impact that I want to make with my town, with my
Mhm.
city, with my state, and then ultimately my country, and then my world. Right. So there's this impact crater that happens, and if I don't give consideration to the foundation that all of that is built on. So divisiveness is not going to solve the challenge that we have right now in our Western culture of men and women being in healthy, loving relationships. And, of course, I see a lot of online, I see a lot of like, you know, men hating on women, I see women hating on men. I've been on Facebook lately that, you know, some guys that are just intentionally being a bit out there
Mhm.
with their stances around relationships and women, and of course you see all the women come completely unhinged. And I mean, I could even take this opportunity to kind of backtrack and kind of point out where I things have gone awry, but none of that really helps. None of it's really useful unless we can come back to a place where we start to take personal responsibility for our lives and stop demonizing men, and men stop demonizing women. The hypergamy argument, I've heard that. Do I think there's some truth to it? Sure. um, Men being, being somewhat similar in the sense of like whatever their challenges are, and women, can that be true? Absolutely. There's a lot of dysfunction in the world. There's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of things going on out there, and we can point to those things and use that as a reason as to why outside world is so challenging. But again, I look at it as like if you're living an inside out life, right? You can begin to, number one, be at a vantage point for yourself, whether you're a man or a woman, to be at a vantage point where you take responsibility, where if you are dating, if you're out there, like me personally, I don't date online. I just don't do it because it's a losing battle, right? I'm 5'4". I'm not a super tall dude, and it doesn't bother me. But I know for a fact, many, 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 many women, because I tried to do the online thing years ago, it's a losing battle. So I'm not going to play a game that's based on an outside in life that's going to then have me feeling like shit all the time, right? So it's like me, I'm going to play a game in life that I'm going to enjoy, right? And so by playing a game that I enjoy, it means as a man that I have my business, I have my health, I have, well, first of all, I have my connection to spirit, I have my business, I have my hobbies, the things that I like to do, play guitar and draw and a whole bunch of other cool stuff and read. And then ultimately, it's like a woman aligning in my life happens naturally because she falls in love with who I'm being, not what I'm doing for her. Does this make
Mm,
sense? So
okay.
for a man, it's very, very similar in the sense of like now I'm very aware of the red flags that come up in a relationship. And I kind of want to use this as an opportunity to point out breaking free of our own assumptions. And the assumption is that every woman out there is flawed, or vice versa. Every man out there is flawed and they need to meet up to my expectations. The number one cause of depression and anxiety in our lives, or at least in my life, is unmet and unrealized, unmet expectations, right?
Yeah.
You're not showing up the way I think you should, Jazzy, so you need to change. You're causing me a lot of anxiety. If you love me, you'll do it. Now, nobody actually comes out and says that, I don't think, right?
Yeah.
But that's what
But
the
that's the vibe. Yeah.
yeah, and I see this from many women as well. Again, I'm not picking on one or the other. We both have our challenges. We both have the areas of our lives that we have to, in my opinion, we have to start to take responsibility for without making men responsible. Now, there's some really, and I know you have too. We've watched some of the same dating stuff and YouTube videos, and it's like all these. What is it? Imjao. I don't know what it's called, but it's like, you know, they're like demonizing all the women. And
Yeah.
listen, some of those are straight up toxic city. But I don't care about all that because all I care about right at this point is making bringing peace to my world, and then inevitably opening that up and inviting a woman into that at some point. I prefer her meeting me to my frame, right? And I think that's something we've heard before. So I prefer that. Now, does that mean I don't want a strong woman? No, absolutely not, because the type of woman that I know that I'm clear on that I want to call into my life, I know that her values somewhat align. They're not the same, but I know that they somewhat align with my values. And so you might say, Tony, that sounds great. How do you do that? Let me give my little three stages of figuring this stuff out, right? So there's three stages that I've figured out that are really important before I become sexually intimate with someone. Because I'm just going to preface it: the minute you become sexually intimate with someone, all this goes out the window. You're no longer thinking with your mind. You're thinking with your body, right? For both men and women. Okay. So I want to understand these three areas prior to me becoming intimate with someone. Number one is going to be, how are they when they are relaxed, right? Go on a first date. Yeah, everybody's relaxed for the most part, having a good time. Things can easy, especially if you involve alcohol, which I don't like to do on a first date, by the way. Involve alcohol. I mean, some people will say alcohol is a truth serum. I tend to believe that, right? I've seen some definitely interesting stuff come out when somebody gets drunk. I'm not saying that wouldn't be part of it, but it's interesting to observe. But how are they when they're relaxed? And realize that everyone is relaxed at some said point. And it's like, how are they when they let their advocate go away? Everybody's bringing their advocate in when they first meet somebody, right?
Yeah. And
Nobody
some
wants.
people's advocates are very, very amazing.
Very amazing, right? So again, this is where narcissism and codependency, there are red flags, there are things that I've noticed, that I've picked up on. I've lived them. I've been that person. I realize that. To me, it's being able to own that and be like, okay, that's not useful anymore for the life and the quality and the stance that I want to come from. But knowing how they are when they're relaxed, super important. Number two, how are they when they're stressed? So you and I go to dinner, for an example. Guy comes out, brings you the wrong dinner. You're pissed. You push the plate off the table. It crashes to the floor. I'm being
Definitely something I would do.
right,
Get this out of my face.
right. Yeah, I know you're totally kidding. But that's obviously, I'm seeing how they handle stressful situations. Imagine if they handle that small, and that to me, that's small potatoes. Somebody messes up your dinner or whatever. But someone who does that, imagine what they're going to do if you lose your job tomorrow as a man and you don't have something lined up. How's she going to behave? Right? Personally, I'd rather a woman that goes, maybe you got this. I know you do. Like, just support me, right?
Right.
Rather than, what the hell are you going to do? How are you going to, right? Like this condescending. So you can imagine, like, how it starts is how it ends. This is why, like, I'm watching for these little things. And again, they're not boxes to check, by the way.
Right.
These are vantage points to see if they align. Because here's another concept that's really important. Are they at the same altitude, going in the same direction at the same speed? This means in their values, in their faith, their fitness, their finances, right? Like these areas that are super important. Are they at the same altitude, going in the same direction at the same speed, right? Very controversial. I won't date a woman who's got excess weight, like a lot of weight, right? We're not at the same vantage point. I value fitness and health and functionality and mobility, right? I have nothing against somebody who carries extra weight. That's your business. I just don't want to create a life with you because it's not what I find attractive, and we're not going to be at the same vantage point, right? So, and then the key is like, once I figured out how they behave when they're stressed, now I want to see how they behave when they're intimate. And that does not mean sex with me. Intimate means, like, for an example, if I was to meet a woman's dad, does she give dad a hug when she sees him? So glad to see you. Or is she kind of standoffish, like, stay the hell away from me, I don't really like you, right? This is very important stuff, right? This is very important to me because generally I like to find out, hey, what's your relationship like with your dad? Right? That's an important question. And I probably wouldn't ask it just like that, but I would say, hey, tell me about your dad. And then I'd move on, tell me about your mom, right? Or I might lead with the mom and then lead with the dad because I know how she feels about her dad is going to be somewhat, I'm not saying this is an exact science, it's going to give me some idea of how I'm going to be treated in her world.
Mm.
Same thing goes for men and women, right? So we're complex, all right? There's none of this that's like a tried and true, like, this is how it always works. But the reason why I like stances so much and these concepts is because they don't lead me to making assumptions. I go off of data. I don't go by what someone said. I go by what they do.
Hmm.
Right? Baby, I love you. Meanwhile, you're back here talking to 8 other guys on Instagram, right? Which I've experienced that. Oh, but I love you. But then meanwhile, like my nervous system's firing off, going crazy because I know something's not right, right? So going through those three things, knowing how someone is when they're relaxed, when they're stressed, and when they're intimate. And you don't just go by one little situation in each. To me, it's like this is part of the dating process prior to becoming intimate. Is do I want to allow myself to quote unquote fall in love with this person, right? Will they do they value their emotions? Do they value their life in ways that are meaningful? Because here's what I've discovered: in a healthy relationship, 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2. Right? The worst thing in the world was Jerry Maguire. You complete me, right? And that took off, like, everybody was, oh, how romantic. No, it's toxic, right? Terribly toxic because I don't want a woman to complete me. I want her to complement me. And, a lot of people, again, based on outside influences, telling us, like Jerry Maguire, like, oh, like, you complete me. People get really screwed up into that kind of philosophy. But again, from an inside out world, 1 plus 1 equals 11 because we're both maybe not completely whole, but we're on our journey. And I think this is super important to see: is this man or woman, depending on who you are are they taking responsibility for their feelings? Are they taking responsibility for their perspective in life? And are they a victim or are they a victor? Right. So for me, again, 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2 in a healthy relationship. 1 plus 1 equals 11 because we're both being responsible for ourselves. Now, this brings up some really interesting ideas because I believe, like, I'm a big fan of emotional intelligence. This is where, again, the vantage point comes from, is practicing that emotional intelligence. A woman who goes through, 8 relationships and all the guys are, showing up a particular way, maybe if it's narcissistic or if it's just they're after the booty or whatever, it's like, I get that. It's easy to point the finger, but like I mentioned earlier, the things that we want are going to be found in the places we don't want to go to get them. And this means doing the work, because nothing is going to change by demonizing men. And same for men. Nothing's going to change for you by demonizing women. They all money grubbers, they want this. It's like, listen, we all want security, right? We all want that to some degree. The problem is when you're trying to seek it from someone else rather than from your own connection to spirit or your own connection to yourself. And
Mhm.
again, this is where taking the head to the heart is so key. So that for me, like, what's super attractive, yeah, I want to be with a woman who's beautiful, of course, nothing wrong with that. But what's more important is that how beautiful is she, or how beautiful is her connection between her heart and her mind, right? How grounded is she in that connection? Because us men, we can tell. Women can tell when a man is grounded in himself and he has an aim and he has a purpose in life, right? And so as men, I feel like we've got to get back to teaching our young men. I'm going to tell them, like, when you're 17, you're 18, you're a man. Now, super important here, but it doesn't mean that their emotional age matches their physical age.
Mm.
Okay. This is a very key distinction. I also can kind of figure this out based on those 3 situations I mentioned, right? Watching them. How are they when they are stressed? When I'm stressed, I know how I show up, and I can be with my spouse or my mate and I can let them know, like, hey, if I shut down, if I go quiet, it's because I'm trying to self-regulate. I don't want to, I want to respond to the situation, not react.
Mhm.
Now, there are going to be certain situations as a man, if I'm with my woman, that I need to react. Like, it would be useful to react. Like if she's in danger or we're in danger, yeah, I need to react. But even then, I'm going to still choose to respond to the situation. It's the same when it comes to my faith, when it comes to my fitness, when it comes to my family, when it comes to my finances. I want to respond to those areas of my life, not react. And I think getting back to that point with young men is teaching them to respond from an emotionally intelligent standpoint. One of the things I do believe in also, and again, I'm a fan of a lot of different quote unquote online mentors. Jordan Peterson happens to be one, and I happen to have a couple of things that come to mind when I was speaking on this. But he talks about being a monster. Like, men need to be a monster, but they also need to know how to manage the monster, right? So knowing how to kick somebody's ass, for an example, is like that. You could be a monster. You could go around bullying people and kick their asses all day long, right? But that's not useful, right? But
Mhm.
knowing how to kick somebody's ass, especially when you're only 5'4", right? Knowing how to kick somebody's ass, but choosing not to do that. But yet, if you're in a situation where you find yourself that you need to, it's useful, right?
Yeah.
And I think men, again, a lot of folks are talking about toxic masculinity. Here's the thing: if we stopped using labels so much, just like narcissism, it's exploded. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't use the word, but but narcissism is a spectrum, just like autism. You'll come across some people you never know they're autistic, right? It's because it's a spectrum. They might be lower on the spectrum. If they're higher on the spectrum, same thing with narcissism. But here's the key: there can be no narcissist if there is no victim. When you're living an inside out life, you're not a victim, because you're taking full responsibility for your life. It just so happens most of the relationships that I have been in, which have been pretty toxic, a lot of them, I use those as opportunities to reflect, to see where I brought the creation to that relationship. I can
Right.
see the areas and the red flags where I betrayed myself, right? I hear this a lot. Women go, he cheated on me, he betrayed me. And I'm hearing it on both sides a lot now, right? It used to be mostly men would be the cheaters. Now we're seeing both sides just completely going ape shit, right? Cheating. I'm not a victim of my past relationships that cheated. Matter of fact, they did me a favor, right? Matter of fact, they mirrored to me an opportunity to gain a new vantage point. So I'm actually grateful for my past relationships. Matter of fact, I'm even grateful for my stepfather who almost killed me several times. Right? I can find gratitude in that situation. Him and I talk quite fairly often now, and I've even spent time, for lack of a better word, just going deep diving with him because he's still carried a lot of that trauma himself over these 40 years or so. And so it's been really healing as this work has helped me, number one, come back to a place of balance for myself, um, to where it's actually I began to make an impact, both not just with myself, but then like if I had a spouse right now, or someone in that sense, I can make an impact with them. If I had children, I can make an impact with them. And again, the circle continues to go out, right? And so making that impact. Here I am, 40 some odd years later, making an impact in his life, telling him, hey, I wouldn't be the man I am today if it wasn't for what we went through together. And just thank God that I didn't get killed. Right? Let's find something to be grateful for. Let's turn shit into sugar.
Yeah.
Because the world out there, the powers to be, excuse me, seem to enjoy us being at odds with one another. Whether that's big media, whether that's whatever you want to point the finger at, I don't really care. All I know is that as a species, we are not going to create healthy, loving babies and families and communities and societies if we continue to be off on opposite sides of the table. And what that means is I can tell everybody all day long, fix your traumas, do all this kind of stuff, go figure all that shit out. I
Yeah.
could, but not everybody's going to choose to do so, which is why I'm saying like all this I'm bringing to the table today is simply my experience. It's going to greatly differ from someone else. Somebody might read this and completely argue with me. You can't. I'm not interested in arguing. I'm interested in communicating. I'm interested in us complementing one another, not creating more chaos together. So, and guess where that all started though? With me. It started with me just rolling down the hill like a tard, just getting beat up constantly, being a victim. I'll tell you something. Here's what I used to do probably in my 30s. I was going through a really tough time. I would purposely go broke. And if a friend gave me money, it meant that I was important. And then I'd go back to making money, right? Talk about weirdness. Like I've got more weirdness in my past that I could point to that I've been able to gain a healthy vantage point from, because here's what I also know. Every behavior that I've had, and I don't think this is far off for many people, is because you feel that you're gaining something, right? We do things because we feel like we are gaining something. So I've done some of the dumbest stuff in the world, and you'd wonder like, why in the world is he doing that? Like I've had friends go, "Why are you dating her? Didn't you just get out of something similar with somebody else? Like, what are you doing?" Right? It's because I was gaining a sense of certainty. It was familiar to me, and I didn't have the vantage point at that point. I hadn't crawled up and gained a vantage point. Right? You can never outperform your own self image. So there comes a point when it was important for me to kind of step outside of my self image and have this vantage point to be like, dude, like, what are you recreating here in your life? Are you sick of this yet? Because it has nothing to do with anybody out there. any of the
Mm,
girls that are cheating, any of the dudes that are, mistreating you or, not being, it's like,
right.
it's not them. And this is going to be a drastically challenging pill for a lot of people to choose to swallow. But the moment that you do, I can just tell you, like, it's very freeing, and it provides you this opportunity to realize, like, like, we could talk about Andrew Tate all day long, right? We could talk about um, all the stuff that he kind of brings to the table, that's divisiveness and, misogynistic, is some what some people will tell you. I've talked to women who love him. They're like, geez, finally a dude who can can stand on his, almost dropped an F-bomb, but finally a dude who can, like, stand for something, right? And I think that's where my point is. You don't have to be as loud as he is as a man. Matter of fact, I'm probably more the opposite. I'm very quiet about a lot of this. This is the first time I've probably come out, like, to really talk about this in public. And it's
Mhm.
only because I feel like my own life demonstrates enough of this vantage point living that it might be useful for me to share some of this with people, right? And I think that the moment that, that we can um, come to this point where we remove labels in life, or at least catch ourselves using the labels all the time. He's misogynistic. He's a narcissist. She's codependent. She's a gold digger. Right? Like, all of these, they're just not useful.
I even think red flag is a label personally, because how
100%.
you're interpreting it doesn't mean that that belongs to that person. That means that it's
Right.
your reaction. It's your thing that
Right.
you're having in response to this person. So I don't like the red flag. I think that's a label too, but
Yeah,
for the
it
con.
certainly can be. And again, it just comes down to, like, what's useful and what's not. Because here's the big thing: as a man and as a woman, I think it's important to have an aim for ourselves to some degree. Now, I could go back to what I think is appropriate as a relationship and what I'm seeking in a woman. Not going to do that right now. A lot of people won't agree with it, but they don't need to agree with it because it's my experience, right?
Mhm.
And human beings are complex. And the moment that I started to get clear on altitude, direction, and speed, and living an inside out life rather than an outside in life,
Mhm.
everything began to change for me, because I realized, like, I could meet a lot of women and they're just at a different altitude, right? I've met some women that are just, I felt like, were at a much higher altitude than me, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be a good fit for them. That
Really?
that takes a lot of balls, right? Like, and I say balls in the sense of, like, I know what they're.
Self-aware.
Yeah, yeah, it's self awareness. It's also standards, right? You know, I think that takes a lot of self awareness to realize, like, hey, listen, she's beautiful. She might even be willing to sleep with me, but so what? Because sleeping with me is not going to mean anything if there's not any intimacy, transparency, heart, connection. To me, what makes intimacy so amazing, it's like, hey, I'm connected here and here deeply. I'd love to share that with you. Right? Like, that's hot. That's meaningful to me. I'm not saying that's meaningful to everyone. The challenge is we get so caught up in status. And believe me, I have my preferences when it comes to women, right? Like, what I would like them to look like in some senses. So I'm not saying that's not important, but if that's the primary focus, right? Because I hear a lot about, oh, we have a lot of chemistry. That's great. What happens when the chemistry is not always there? Because chemistry, feelings are temporary. This is why commitment. Like, if I could go back, I look at, I got divorced. If I could go back, I might have changed some behaviors of mine. I'm just going to tell you, right? No, I don't regret the decision because it was part of what's brought me to where I am in life now.
Right.
But if I would have been practicing these stances back then, I don't believe I would have gotten a divorce.
I think it would be more strange if you would look back on that time and say, "No, there's nothing I'd change."
Oh, yeah,
That
yeah,
would be much more
yeah. That would
like,
be weird, right? Yeah. And by the way, I just came back into connection with my ex-wife. We haven't talked to each other in 17 years, and she reached out to me out of the blue, and we met and we had lunch for like 2 hours and we celebrated each other's. It was like it was a beautiful thing, you know.
Nice. Yeah.
Um, God bless it. She lost her husband probably about a year ago, and so she's going through a lot of grief, of which I'm very familiar with grief. I've been very intimately connected to it, especially in the last 2 years, and being with that. But yeah, it's like if I knew then what I know now, I would have been a very different person. And I think in so many words, I even told her, I was like, hey, I just wasn't a great person of character back then. I think I had decent intentions, but I became more reactive than responsive to the situation. I mean, I still brought a lot of trauma from my childhood that I hadn't completely gotten through, into that space. And I'm not saying that, because some people they may read into it and go, Tony, you mean I got to fix all my traumas and all that kind of stuff before I get into a relationship? Well, that doesn't sound like fun. I'm not saying that's 100% true, but what I am saying is don't be afraid. If you are aware, don't be afraid to put your cards on the table with someone. Let them know what they're getting into. Imagine how that might change things drastically. Hey, Jazzy, thanks a lot for sharing that. That's really fascinating that you decided to put that on the table with me, and I really appreciate that. I don't feel I'm going to be a good fit for you. Now, that's something you might take the risk of experiencing. But imagine someone who actually says, thank you. I appreciate that. I don't feel I would be a good fit for this container, but I really respect and honor you mirroring back to me such transparency. And you go your separate ways. Imagine how much more efficiently we could get through relationships without creating more trauma, without coming from our wounds, coming more from our wisdom. I think that's probably my biggest thing is like I do my best these days to come from wisdom rather than my wounds. Beforehand, I was very unconscious, I was reactive, and I would come from my wounds. And I'd try to cover it all up with sex. That was my thing. Sex, right? So there comes a point when eventually, you get tired of hitting your head up against the wall and you start to go,
Yeah.
well, how can I enter into things more mindfully, more intentionally, more from my wisdom? And that takes reflection. That takes, taking responsibility. And also I think one of the big things too is when I say some of this to some people individually, and they're like, oh, I gotta wait till I'm totally unfucked myself and before I can actually, be in a relationship. And I'm like, no, it just means like how transparent, how aware, how much of a vantage point are you willing to take possession of so that when you get with someone, you can say, hey, here's what's coming up for me. And you don't have to do that in all situations either. But I think it could be useful at some point in time, whereas we're not sitting here divisive and demonizing the other party and the other person. Now, will I say it is important, I think, to be mindful of toxic behavior. I think it is important to kind of like be able to witness it and choose not to go into it. Um, but sometimes that's not always possible for people. I can tell you, growing up, most of my life, that wasn't possible.
Something that I don't remember where I heard or read this though recently, and I thought this was kind of important, is that, no matter how conscious you are, right? No matter how much personal development work you do, like we're not going to be able to completely avoid, chaos, conflict within
No,
relationships.
no.
And I think that even I had that misconception that, like, well, I've done so much work on myself. I meditate, I do the spiritual stuff. Like, how could this be happening right now? Like,
I'm entitled to a good relationship.
exactly. I mean, everything should be smooth.
Yeah,
Why isn't it smooth? Maybe
again.
he must have some kind of childhood thing going on,
Right,
because
right.
I know that I'm my side of the street.
And
Whatever,
if he does, let me
but
fix it. And if he does, let me fix it. Right?
get out my book and fix it
Yeah.
for him.
There's been more problems of people dating based on potential than dating on what's actually happening in the present.
Mhm.
I know for a fact, not only would I look over what was going on in the present, but I would want to fix what was going on in the present so that I could have the potential of the relationship. Right? Which is a huge
Yeah.
fail. It's a huge fail. It
No.
just doesn't work.
Don't do. I've I've done that. I'm not supposed to do that.
What, fix people
Well,
or date
you
on
look
potential?
at what's happening in the present as if we can correct this or adjust this, then the potential for this thing could be great. Like that.
Yeah. In my experience, and again, there's been a lot of change, but my models that I have, the couple models that I have of super long term relationships, they just don't do it, nor did they. Now, I can tell you the two relationships that I model right now that are in my life, I can tell you both men were a small train wreck when they met the women,
Mm.
right? Smoking, I say train wreck, but like smoking, unhealthy, kind of an asshole, kind of snippy a little bit in one of the relationships. But she chose to see what he brought to the table in the sense of like other things, right? And he'll even say, like, I don't know how she dealt with me the first couple of years of marriage, right? But see, this is what I mean by a strong woman. Not that she puts up, like, he didn't do anything disrespectful, right? Like, I think he did probably get a little hot or heated on occasionally, but, but like a woman who's really grounded in herself, who's not attached to what she thinks things should look like or supposed to be or ought to be or need to be. Those are all, every time you use those words, ought to, need to, should, supposed to, you're injecting your value system and projecting it onto somebody else and expecting them to live by it.
That's an agenda. That would be considered an agenda.
Thank you. Right. And a lot of men and women go into relationships going, man, she's gorgeous, but if she would just do this, she should do this, she ought to do this, she needs to be like this. And they try to contort the other person, and now you have a big problem. But the two relationships that I'm modeling right now that are 50 years and almost 30 years, the women didn't do that. They knew that they were good men, they knew they were not perfect, and they were patient, loving, supportive. The men weren't disrespectful, they didn't cheat, they didn't do any of that kind of stuff, right? But again, I'm not saying it was perfect either, and nor is it ever really, rarely perfect. This is the other again, we're presented this outside in view that relationships should be perfect. You know,
Mhm.
sex should be off the wall every single time,
That
and
everyone else's relationship is perfect.
oh
So,
yeah, because this is what we see on Instagram and and TikTok and how amazing things are, and every guy should come to the table. He should take her out to a 5-star restaurant the first date they go on. I ain't doing none of that shit. Be lucky we go on a coffee date, figure out if I like you or not, vice versa, right? It's
oh,
like,
come on, Tony. Coffee? Come on.
listen, I've no, I've done all of that. I've spent, I've went on $200, $300, $500 dates, first time. I won't do it again because everybody's got their advocate, right? Because that's not always me. I like nice stuff. Don't get me wrong. I got a nice lifestyle. I like going. We got Burns Steakhouse here in Tampa. Trust me, if I'm dating somebody, eventually we go into Burns. It's gonna be fun, right? We're going to do the dessert room. But it's like, I don't want the relationship to be built on such high expectations all the time because it's not who I am. I know myself. I'm not going to be that guy all the time. I'm going to be him sometimes. And see, this is the other thing too. When you understand shadow, like shadow work, which is something I've been a huge proponent of. I have a friend of mine that I'd known for many, many years that thankfully I'm grateful she introduced this to my life, changed my life when I started to understand shadow. I can be a lot of things sometimes. I can be I can be an asshole sometimes. Now, would I choose to be an asshole with my significant other? No. Would I be an asshole with someone who's trying to take advantage of me? Maybe. All right. If I choose into it, not because I'm reacting, but because I'm responding, because I need to set some really strong boundaries. This is shadow. So, shadow, usually, what I'll find in a lot of relationships, um, is whatever we're projecting onto someone else with such emotional intensity. You better look at where it's coming from.
Mm.
9.5, I would say 9.999% of the time, it's you. It's your stuff, right? I can't tell you how many times I've had someone that's cheated and then they start to act and behave like their spouse is cheating. I think they're up to something. I think but what are they doing? They're just projecting their own cheating. They're projecting their own shadow. And so shadow is something that we all have it, but I think if we were to slow up, to hurry up, and start to look at like the projections, like a lot of men projecting on to women, the gold digger label. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen. 100% does. We've seen it, right? But the fact that a guy is so triggered by it, it's like, dude, like, what kind of woman is a gold digger? Shallow. Interesting. Where are you shallow? Because if you weren't, you wouldn't be so triggered by it,
Right. Or are you
right?
yeah, exactly. Are you trying to date the chick with the BBL and the
Yeah.
big boobs
Oh,
and
oh yeah.
the Gucci
Right.
purse, and then you're mad that she's, you know, a
Wants
gold.
nice things. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like you're
But you
upset.
like what you see as well.
Oh,
So maybe you need to, yeah, I get it.
yeah. Again, it all comes back down to personal responsibility. It comes back down to knowing ourselves. It comes back down to what's my developmental age, right? Like this is a thing, and that I went through psychotherapy for like 2 years. When I was 7, I went through all the trauma as a child, and for 2 years they put me through psychotherapy. And you start to realize as you get older, like what's your developmental age?
Hmm. Does
Not
it
your
always stay the same?
what's that?
Is it like the same?
Well, it depends because there's a lot of areas of which adults are still very much childlike. So one of the things I do in my business is when I go into a large, I usually work with 7 or 8 figure companies, and I go in there and I start to like look at a couple of things like what's the developmental stages of a child, infant, toddler, adolescent, teenager, and adult, right? So when I go into a company, I'm trying to figure out, is the guy who's or gal who's running this thing, are they infant, toddler, adolescent, teenager, or adult when it comes to money, right? Because a lot of that I can start to get a frame or an idea, and I'm listening to, wow, are they going to have a problem paying me? Right? It's like little things, or are they going to argue with me about a percentage? Right? When I'm saying, hey, listen, do you want 50% of a watermelon or you want 100% of the grape? Well, if they're arguing for 100% of the grape, I know they're probably at an infant or a toddler stage when it comes to money, right? I don't want to work with them. They're going to be difficult to deal with. Well, the same thing is true when we come over to an intimate relationship, both with ourselves, first and foremost. When it comes to faith, family, fitness, and finance, which there's lots of subcategories below those, but it's like, what's my developmental age when it comes to, my mental and emotional maturity? And that's all going to come down to how connected are these two things, right?
Hmm.
How aware am I?